Hello and welcome to Trinity Talk Live, water cooler conversation from a Christian perspective. I'm Ken Coughlin.
And I'm Ben Lander.
Thank you very much for joining us this week and every week at 5:30 here on the Trinity Talk YouTube channel. If this is your first time watching the show, then let me tell you a little bit about it. What it is, the byline says it all. We are water cooler conversation from a Christian perspective, which means that what Ben and I endeavor to do every week is talk about the same topics that you all are talking about out there around the water cooler. But what makes this show unique and stand out from other shows you can find online or on your airwaves is that we try to bring a uniquely Christian perspective to the issues. So you may agree with us, you may disagree with us, but hopefully you'll walk away with us at least seeing that what we try to do is always put Christ first in all of our conversations and all the priorities here. So, with that being said, this is a discussion program. Ben and I are going to talk about various topics here tonight, but you're invited. And the way you do that, if you are watching us on YouTube, you will comment in the live chat, which is, the live chat of the YouTube feature. If you're watching us on Facebook, you can comment in the comments section of the video right there on Facebook. We are live on both the Trinity Joppa YouTube channel and the Trinity Joppa Facebook page. When you write a comment, it will appear over there in that box to Ben's left. And when we have a break in the conversation where we can pick that up, we'll read your comment on the air, read your question, respond, interact with you, whatever you may want to know, throw it out there. I've got both the Facebook feed and the YouTube feed on the computer here in front of me to see your comments. And if I miss it, Mary Kay, my wife, our producer, will hold up a sign to get my attention to let me know there's something there to read. So that's pretty much the way the show works. We got 5 topics to go over tonight. None of them controversial at all.
Tongue in cheek.
Yeah, we're gonna hopefully demonstrate how people can talk about issues from a Christian perspective, even if sometimes those issues within the Christian church aren't always being talked about from a Christian perspective.
We'll get there tonight.
We'll get there tonight too. So let's get jumping right in, Ben.
Before that, do we want to mention, even if you comment after the fact, after the live stream, please still do that, and we'll still try to interact. We'll go back from the previous week's live stream, and if there are any comments or questions that you've left throughout the week, we'll try to address them.
Absolutely.
Speaking of which, do we have any?
I don't believe we do from last week. Nothing came in after the fact. So if I'm wrong, and I apologize. But yeah, so if you're watching this, if you can't watch it live, we'd love for you to watch it live because then we can actually have the back and forth interaction. But if you're not able to watch it live, you are still a valued viewer. And if you have a question, comment, throw it in the comment section there on YouTube, and we'll check that and bring it up next week. Yeah, so, hey, what's our first story tonight, sir?
All right. Well, speaking of YouTube, and if you're a fan of the slightly...
First, you'll understand this when we get through this. Maybe we should have done this story last because is our live stream going to get cut short by YouTube in the middle of this? I don't know. We'll see.
We'll find out.
If we get cut off, you'll know why. What's our first story?
Well, if you are a fan of the, let's say slightly controversial and offensive, or if you know the name Steven Crowder, then I'm sure you may also be familiar with the current legal battle that he is engaged in. His account, actually both accounts, he has a secondary account which has also been temporarily suspended. And now this is the second time that his channel has been suspended. The first time, for those of you who aren't familiar with Steven Crowder, he's a talk show host. He hosts a talk show called Louder with Crowder. And he's a conservative, but a lot of and it's kind of like a mix between like The Daily Show, and he has kind of a unique blend of things. We're not here necessarily to endorse him. Some of the things that he does are a little bit risque,
unchristian-like?
Uncouth, unchristianly. We'll say that. But he is a big proponent of free speech, and so that's kind of what this whole argument is centered around. So basically, essentially what happened was the first time that his channel was removed from YouTube had to do with a reporting that he did on the election, and it was over voter fraud. Now, nowhere does he make the
F
claim.
word, now we're getting cut off. That's it,
I know.
YouTube's suspending our channel.
Well, it was over that issue, but nowhere does he mention, at least in that initial the one that had gotten taken down and subsequently got his channel suspended, nowhere did he mention any that there was widespread voter fraud, which he didn't say that he believed. He was merely kind of addressing this issue, but yet that was not only taken down. YouTube said that it violated their. They have a fancy term for it, but basically saying you can't talk about this, and so got his channel suspended for that. Now a second time his channel has been suspended because of a recent episode on April 21st in which he discussed the Columbus, Ohio police shooting of Ma'Khia Bryant. And according to this one, YouTube claims that it violates the platform's policy on harassment, threats, and cyberbullying. And citing specifically in this episode, apparently he and his crew mocked Bryant for her weight, stating certain things that I guess I'm not going to repeat on here. But that was the reason that this episode got him a second strike. So now, if he receives a third strike, his channel will be removed permanently. Now, not only the primary channel, but also the secondary one, which he's tried to skirt around the issue by going onto the secondary channel, both of which now have been suspended. In response to this, Steven Crowder and his team have filed a lawsuit, litigation against YouTube, stating that YouTube is biased and they violate their own contract, their own terms of service by not being fair in how they apply these content strikes.
Right.
He cited it. A video that we had just talked about was Lil Nas X. We had talked about that one in a previous episode. That was one that he cites as an example of YouTube's bias, where here you have things that we can't even mention. It's happening in this music video, and that content remains up on YouTube and is, in fact, considered child-friendly. And yet, at the same time, certain things, such as Steven Crowder's videos, get taken down, and he gets a content strike about that. So that's the long and short of it, and he's... it's kind of an ongoing, I guess they're in the beginning process of the litigation, so we'll see how that unfolds. But I know you've got some things to say about this.
I do. First thing I like to say is I'm looking at the camera, at the picture of us both on there, and I'm thinking, Ben is dressed like Sunday. Okay? I am dressed like Monday morning.
Fair enough.
This is what Christians look like on Sunday. This is what we look like waking up Monday morning. So,
come as you are.
All right. So yeah. So here I have long been a I've been loud or louder, you could say, but on this show about the marketplace of ideas and all of that. And that's one of the reasons why I did feel kind of strongly why I want to talk about this issue today. And also because we've kind of talked about social media and their role as, publisher versus bulletin board before. So there's a lot of different things to talk about here. First of all, Steven Crowder. For those of you, like you gave a good little summary of him who aren't familiar with him. He describes himself as kind of a mix between David Letterman, Howard Stern, and ironically John Stossel, who John Stossel actually went on to interview him about all this too, so it was kind of neat. And I think that's a fair blend. There's definitely a good amount of Howard Stern approach to how he does his show, but it's a political show. So there are things that he has done that, and I have seen a number of his programs. As a matter of fact, I have seen both of the programs that are at issue here before they were taken down. And so I've seen a number of them, and there are some things I agree. Like if you haven't seen, there's John Stossel wrote a commentary piece on this, and I thought it was very fair because he was talking about how there's certain things that that Steven Crowder does that makes him very proud to be on that list where Steven Crowder compares himself to John Stossel, and so there's other things that Steven Crowder does that makes me cringe. I think
he also uses the term horrified.
Yeah, well, I mean, let's face it. There's been times where he's done, the one instance where he was trying to make a commentary on on China's one-child law, and he kind of dressed up in stereotypical garb and did an accent, and it's just like, and he's trying to say, oh, it's all just a joke, and I'm trying to make fun, through satire, basically, to bring attention to this one-child law they have, and because he was submerging a girl doll into the water, and he's saying they're female children who are getting drowned because of this, because people want male children. And it's like, and I think sometimes what he doesn't necessarily appreciate is no matter how noble the message is, it doesn't always excuse every method that you can come up with to communicate it. And that was kind of a racist method to communicate it. So, so I don't agree, obviously, with a lot of what Steven Crowder has to say in that regard. That being said...
Or maybe the way he says it.
Or the way he says it, yeah. I mean, but that being said, the particular videos at issue here, let's take the first one, for example, where... and there's been, I've actually, when I was looking at the internet, I saw some incorrect reporting where some people were, he's had videos taken down by YouTube, but sometimes people have confused videos that were taken down with the ones that actually got him suspended. The two you described were the ones that led to the suspensions. The first one that caused the first suspension, you're right, he never, ever, through the entire video, made the claim, and he never has made the claim at any time I've seen him, that there was widespread voter fraud in this election that influenced the outcome of the election. He has not said that. He does not claim that. All right. Now, he is an advocate for requiring voter ID. And so while he does not claim that, it would have changed the outcome of this election, he's been very clear about that. What he did do is he went to the state of Nevada, and he basically got a hold of matching up a lot of votes that were cast from particular addresses. And then he would go to those particular addresses. And he was able to demonstrate that some of those addresses didn't exist. So votes were cast from addresses that didn't exist. We have a comment here from Dr. Monk 1832. Hello, gentlemen. Greetings from Germany.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thank you very
much. What time is it? I got a friend in Germany.
And what's the time?
It's got to be late there, isn't it? If you know a guy named Kevin Vino, say hi to him for me.
I'm sure he knows everybody.
Everybody in Germany. I don't even know where Kevin's living in Germany right now.
I guess we should say
I don't know either.
Gute Nacht.
No, Kevin's an actor who's worked with us on a number of projects, and he got a job over there in Germany. And the only reason it brings my attention, Dr. Monk, is because I know whenever my friend's posting on Facebook, he's posting like, "What a beautiful sunset," and I'm like, "Really? Not here?" And so I'm very much aware of how far ahead you guys. So you're watching us live. Wow, thank you. I'm privileged to please join in.
According to Google,
you've Googled it?
Their Greenwich Mean Time +2. Which means it's 11:48.
11:48 p.m.
Oh, man.
In Germany. Well, I don't know, because we got daylight savings time and they don't there. Does that mess things up?
No, because I asked what time is it in Germany right now.
Okay, fair enough.
So, hey, welcome to the show. So in regard to that first one, like I said, that's what he did. He went out and he found there were votes cast from these addresses. He went to the addresses and he showed these addresses don't exist. So these votes clearly were improperly cast, and he actually, and you go to his website and he cited his sources, and so you can actually follow up where he got this information from.
Yeah, he posted it all to his website.
Right. Yep. And so like John Stossel in his opinion piece on this point, I was like, that's called good journalism.
Yeah.
And yet YouTube,
which we don't see in America often.
But YouTube took, suspended, didn't just suspend the channel, they demonetized it. In other words, like you'll notice here, shameless plug, if you're on YouTube, you see a little $sign at the bottom of the chat, you can click on that and you can donate money to the channel. It's called a super chat. And, we earn money off of advertising and things like that. Obviously, Steven Crowder had a lot more subscribers than we do, and so he made money off of his YouTube channel. And they took all that away. They took his ability to make money off his YouTube channel away. Didn't have ads running on it. Couldn't do super chats, things like that. So they did that in addition to suspending him, all claiming that he was running afoul of their policy about questioning the legitimacy of the election, which he never did.
Right.
So now, regardless of what you think about Steven Crowder, and that's why I'm glad we started out talking about what we think of Steven Crowder, that was just good journalism. Dr. Monk says in Germany you get an extra invitation to go vote from the government, and then you have to have identity in the room where you go and vote. And yes, it's late, 23:48. Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah, there you go. Thank
Awesome.
you. Well, Dr. Monk, I'd be curious on your thoughts here about what what you feel about, because that's what stemmed this whole thing. Is, like I said, Steven Crowder is an advocate for requiring identification in order to vote. And while we're not necessarily, the purpose of this story is not to get into all that debate. We've talked about it, I think, somewhat on the show. I can't even remember. We talk about so many things. But I am curious what you think, coming from a nation that apparently does require that, what you would have to say about that, and what you would think about the need for identification there. And then Tim Foster says, we don't see good journalism. This is on Facebook. We don't see good journalism because they're all in on it. The only real journalist is Project Veritas. If you're not familiar with Project Veritas, that is a good institute.
I am familiar with them.
Yeah.
But yeah, actually, I've seen some of their things.
So, I mean, that's the first one. I
Yeah.
won't go to the second one. I want to talk the whole time. But
the second video?
yeah, I mean, I was going to go into that next, but I didn't know if you had anything about the first, what I was saying.
Oh, yeah, well, so, yeah, the first video, I think the issue at hand is not so much, and I think, yeah, you're right, I like that we started off just laying the groundwork of where we stand in regards to some of his content. However, the issue at hand here, especially with the first video, I can see maybe a case for the second, but the first video especially that was taken down and got him suspended, I tend to agree with Steven Crowder's claims that, yeah, YouTube's violating its own policy that's clearly a bias, it seems to me, because they could have easily verified that and gone and watched the video. So either A, it's just an algorithm that takes it down, but the fact they had to quote him directly, I think there had to be some human element there, and so it seems to me that YouTube didn't do its due diligence. Even if it was just some kind of algorithm that took it down in the first place, you know, there's an appeal process, and when you go through that, then it gets human reviewed, reviewed by a human, and they still keep it down, then that becomes problematic. Now, I will say that the second one is more complicated. It's a little bit more complex. No surprise, me being the advocate for Marketplace of Ideas, I still don't think his channel should have been suspended over it. Here's what's missing in most of the reporting on that one. So if you're not familiar with the Ma'Khia Bryant shooting, Ma'Khia Bryant was involved in an assault with another woman in altercation. She's 16 years old. And if you look at the video footage, what you actually see at the time this officer shot Ma'Khia Bryant had a knife and was literally mid-lunge. She was in the process of trying to stab the other woman when the police officer shot her. And so as a result, she was not able to stab the other woman.
Okay, now, it's my understanding they were both under 18, so be careful about using the word woman. But on the other hand, I heard a lot of journalists who were talking about this story and referring to them as little girls, which I wouldn't use that term either.
That's what I was getting at, and that was the context. Understand, the context of at least the way the weight conversation started. It wasn't really even a weight conversation. It was a size conversation. Ma'Khia Bryant was a very large young lady. How's that? What Mr. Crowder was responding to initially was media coverage that was just kind of saying police officer shot a 16-year-old girl and saying it in such a way in a context to make it sound like she was just some helpless little thing. And leaving out the fact that this was a woman who was very capable of aggressively attacking someone and was, in fact, in the process of aggressively attacking someone. So that was how it started. Did it go beyond that to jokes that shouldn't have been told? Yes, it absolutely did. You know, there were DoorDash jokes and things like that. And it was definitely went too far. It was distasteful, okay? What I do find interesting is apparently it was suspended for like harassment,
cyberbullying,
which
I guess maybe it's more sensitive because she's a minor.
How do I say this without sounding insensitive? How do you cyberbully someone who's no longer with us, unless their policy, and it could be their policy could be phrased more broadly. You know, and so I guess I'm open to that. And like I said, I do think the comments were inappropriate. You got to that point, while the initial point and what started that way was the comment that started that way was the comment was appropriate and it was intended to address a real issue, and then it got out of hand. So we do have a couple other comments here, and Dr. Monk here says, I think every citizen has to register ID to prevent voter fraud, but there has to be a way that you don't show what you have voted for.
Sure.
We put a paper with the vote in a big box and people count it. Okay. And then you do ask a question here about why it would be an insult to calling her a woman. And I think, and Dr. Monk, I think that it's just a matter. It's not a matter of it's being an insult. It's just a matter of being accurate. Yeah. Here in the United States, technically, you're not legally an adult until you're 18 years old. And so that's just, and I think what it's getting at is the way the media largely portrayed the incident was just because here in the United States, we call someone, say it's a 16-year-old girl, it creates this impression of minor child. Right. And while she was a minor child, she was also very capable of acting out in an aggressive manner.
There were some journalists who weren't even mentioning her age. They were saying the police shot a little girl.
Yeah.
A little girl. Which
not even,
the connotation here in the United States is we're talking about an elementary school child, which is
and
maybe 10,
helpless.
11, 10-year-old or younger.
Yeah. So I do, even in that regard, I do think that, again, it evolved into one of these things that we were talking about before that got, got more than a little bit, got distasteful. Do I think he should have had his channel suspended over it? No, I don't. I mean, I think that, and I know I'm not going to say freedom of speech because we're going to get to that in the next topic. This is not a freedom of speech issue as far as a constitutional freedom of speech issue. We'll explain why in a minute, but hopefully I'll kind of explain what the issue actually is, though there is still an issue. But anyway.
Yeah, no, and so I think the jump to suspension may have been premature, although I guess I'm trying to put myself in YouTube's shoes. Not that I'm saying that they're right, but if they had already had a precedent that he was suspended once before, albeit improperly, that's the stickler, then it made it easier for them to suspend him a second time. However, I think the first one shouldn't have happened to begin with. And so, yeah, that could have been. And now maybe it seems purposeful because now he only needs one more suspension before he's deplatformed entirely and permanently. And actually, one of these articles said he is demonetized permanently. So even when he comes back, he's still not able to make any money ever again on YouTube, at least under these two channels, unless he starts another channel and regains all of those subscribers and all of this. Yeah, I think it definitely raises concerns for... Really, like you were saying, the reason that we were addressing this in the first place is that it raises concern for should social media and companies like YouTube have this kind of authority to deplatform people. Right. And it comes down to that question of are they a community bulletin board in which they're not responsible for the content, in which case they shouldn't have. Well, you can monitor that. Or are they a publisher?
Right, and that's where I think the issue is. We do have a couple other comments, and Dr. Monk says, is there a law that you can be in front of law whatever you feel like? I'm not sure if I'm following the question, but if I'm understanding you correctly, Dr. Monk, if you're getting back to the age thing, please correct me if I'm misunderstanding you. Is there a law that you can either be whatever you claim to be, whatever you want to be? In regard to age, no, there is not. Obviously, I'm not going to go down the others, but obviously we do have, depending on what state you're in, there are different laws as far as gender and things like that. But age, no. Your the age now. It is somewhat a state-by-state thing. Well, I say that you're considered an adult at 18. Understand there are different privileges you get at different times. Like you can't drink until you're 21, for example. And so driving ages and things like that. So it is kind of an amalgamous or an amorphous kind of thing as becoming an adult. And there will be some variation from state to state. But generally the rule of thumb is 18 is when you're an adult.
You can enlist in the military.
Well, it's when you're allowed to vote. And
enter into contracts of your own and things like that. So, and Ryan Iwanowski here says the mainstream media questioned Trump's legitimacy for 4 years, and that was just considered freedom of speech and journalism. Now it's considered dangerous and must be stomped out. And Ryan, here's the important point. And this is what I think Ben was getting at a second ago with the dangerous precedent that it's setting. And we talked about this on a show some time ago, and I can't remember what we did when it was. But think of a book publisher, all right? If a book publisher publishes a book that is legally actionable, slanderous, libelous, whatever, and it rises and it meets the legal standards for that. We all know there's different rules for public figures and what you can say about them. But if, let's say whatever the book says, or there was a classic case of a publisher that published a book a few years ago, and I can't remember the outcome of the case now off the top of my head, where it was basically how to commit a murder, how to kill someone and get away with it. Well, if someone then takes that book and follows the advice and goes and kills someone, the question becomes, is the publisher responsible, civilly responsible? Can they be sued over publishing such a book? And the answer when it comes to publishers, generally at least, is yes. And the reason that they can be sued over that is because they exert control, final control and authority over what gets published.
Right.
So if you submit something, the publisher can say, yes, I'm going to publish it, or no, I'm not. They can submit it to an editor, and they can say, well, we'll publish it with these qualifications, these changes, things like that. And so because a publisher exercises control over the content they put out, then that publisher can be held responsible for that content. Now, the way social media outlets have gotten around that, because no social media outlet wants to be held responsible for everything people post on social media, needless to say. And so the way they've gotten around that is they've tried to say, oh, we're not publishers, we're essentially bulletin boards. Just think of, a college campus bulletin board or a community bulletin board where anybody who walks by can put up an announcement for whatever party's coming up or everything like that. It's open for everybody to put stuff on there, and the owner of the bulletin board doesn't control the content of what gets put on that bulletin board. In that situation, then the owner of the bulletin board is not legally responsible for the content of what gets put on that bulletin board. And so the question then becomes, if social media really puts fewer or very minimal restrictions on the content of what you can post. Keep in mind, Twitter limits the number of characters, but that's not content. That's length.
Yeah.
But the message that can be communicated, if they don't really control the messages that are communicated, as long as they stay within the boundaries, if they stay generally within the boundaries of what the government would say is actionable and things like that.
Well, because even freedom of speech doesn't protect offensiveness and hate speech.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you can't shout fire in a crowded movie theater, things like that. And so if you stay within those general boundaries, then they could get away with saying, "Hey, we're basically a bulletin board. We're not a publisher. We don't curate the content that gets put on there." But when you start to really enforce certain viewpoints and you say certain opinions aren't allowed to be expressed, and the one that I keep coming back to is that first suspension of Steven Crowder. All right,
yeah,
because what that really amounts to, because he did not say that there was widespread voter fraud that made a difference in the election. He never said it. And of course, I'd say go back and watch the video, but you can't because they took it down. I was watching it. He didn't say it. All right. Now that gets to almost like these topics are out of bounds and all, and you can't even anything that we could possibly interpret the way we want to. We're not going to let you do it. Now
that's a slippery slope.
And so that's the question. I think when we talked about this several months ago, it was with the impression of they're probably still bulletin board people, not publisher people. But it's kind of like looking forward. It's like, but are we getting to a point where they're starting to become publishers? I think we're getting to that point where there's an argument to be made, and maybe this is what Steven Crowder is going after in his lawsuit, where they're starting to look like publishers. Well, I take that back. That's probably isn't what Steven Crowder's arguing, because Steven Crowder's arguing as a user, saying that it's a contract claim, saying we have a contract and you basically violated the terms of that.
He's also arguing the bias with which they demonetize or
which would be the violation of the contract that he has with them. Whereas I think the bigger concern for these social media platforms is, hey, do you really want to go here? Because if you do and you become a publisher, you better have 15 bazillion employees that are looking over every single post, because one post gets through that leads to something that you can be sued over. Guess what? Back up the Brinks truck,
Yep.
So anyway.
No, I agree. I think it's dangerous territory whenever we cross into, and even ideologically, it's the thought police. Certain topics are off bound, not just certain things that you can't say that could be deemed offensive, but just a broader topic is not able to be discussed, and that's dangerous territory. Now we're getting into. I think Steven Crowder has a good case here against it, even if it's not necessarily on the grounds of YouTube's application of their guidelines, but the broader question of whether or not they are publishers.
Well, and I think what if nothing else, that's what his lawsuit could kind of force YouTube's hand at. It's like YouTube. In other words, he's suing it presumably in a breach of contract situation. But how is YouTube going to respond to it? Because YouTube's hands could end up being tied here, because if they respond, look, it's our platform, we have the right to control what goes on it, Okay, publisher.
Yep.
You know that's what you see on social media. You know, all the time people respond to things like this. Like, well, YouTube's platform, so they can control what goes on it. Yes, they can, but they can't then turn around and claim that they're immune from liability when something gets published there that they don't like.
Yeah, because once you make that crossover from bulletin board to publisher, for lack of a better phrase, then you're no longer protected under the what's the law that they try to hide.
The cyber law. Yeah.
I forget the name of it right now. If anybody thinks of it, please let us know.
Well, here's another wrinkle just to consider. I was interested in, we're talking as if YouTube is an American.
And we're still on the air. That's what's amazing. so far, we're still on YouTube.
As far as I can tell, yeah, we're talking about it as if it's American United States company, and because then it would. I mean, that's the interesting thing about the internet is it's out there. It's all what we're putting out obviously has attracted the attention of somebody from Germany.
Who just commented again, Dr. Monk? I see your comment. I'll get to that in a second.
What I find interesting is we're talking in terms of, American law, and how do you police? I mean, how do you have a governing legal system over something when it goes out to all these different countries? And just out of curiosity, I did look it up, and YouTube, although I don't know, I assume their main headquarters
is in the U.S.
They do have offices and office locations in other countries.
So the answer to your question,
one of those
quickly,
being in Germany. So
I don't bore people, with the lawyer answer. First of all, YouTube is owned by Google, and Google's a U.S. company. But regardless, if you're doing business in a country, lots of times there are restrictions to that country, registration requirements in order to do so. Even in the U.S. to operate from state to state. Like Walmart is not a Maryland company, but they have to be registered with the Maryland Department of Assessments and Taxation in order to do business here. Mm-hmm. And so there are things like that do bring you under the jurisdiction, under the umbrella of whatever country that you're doing business in. Dr. Monk says, do the comments get live censored on your show by YouTube? My last comment did not go through. Well, the answer is not that I'm aware of.
Not that we're aware of.
Matter of fact, about the only thing I don't think you can, we do have, there are some filters, and I can't remember what they all are on our channel. We're a church channel. So, I don't remember if there's a language filter on our live comments or not. There might be. I know there is one that does not allow links. So if you posted a link, that might not have gone through. So if there's something you want to refer us to, describe, tell us what the website is, maybe something like that, but don't actually point a link to it because that would prevent it. But other than that, no, there shouldn't be any reason why your comment did not get posted. So I'm not sure why that is. Try it again. That's what I'd say.
It's intriguing, though.
Yeah, especially considering what we're talking about. No, that one's anti-YouTube. That's not going through. Oh, gosh. And there goes our channel. No, so anyway.
Maybe we should move on.
It's a miracle. We're still on.
We should move on because of the time.
Yeah, because of the time.
And you have 4 other stories to talk about.
We do, and I told you some of these were going to be kind of long. But yeah, if you have, look, we're going to move on to our next story, but I know there's a buffer delay, and if somebody else has another comment about this story, it doesn't mean you can't put it in the comment section. We can come back and revisit and bounce around and all that. That's fine. Say what you want to say. But let's move on to our second story of the evening. And I'm going to need my glasses because I'm old. And this is something that a lot of folks here on the East Coast in particular of the United States have been dealing with over the past week, and that is that we had a gas shortage. Now, before anybody says, well, that's a boring story, why are you talking about a gas shortage? Well, there's a little bit more to it than that. There was a ransomware group based out of Russia, not the Russian government, mind you, just a ransomware group called DarkSide that launched a cyber attack against the Colonial Pipeline last week. This is one of the largest pipeline systems in the United States and apparently carries about 45% of the fuel that is sold on the East Coast comes through this pipeline. Now, I've seen conflicting reports about whether DarkSide itself initiated the attack, or it almost sounds like some of the ones said that DarkSide actually kind of leases out its malware to other people who conduct the attack. But essentially what happened, now it doesn't sound like the malware itself got to the point where it was actually interfering with the operation of the pipeline itself. But if I'm understanding the stories correctly, it sounds like that the higher ups there were concerned that it was going to, and so they preemptively shut down the pipeline.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, go ahead. No.
Well, my understanding of the ransomware is that they operate under a Robin Hood-esque philosophy where they take money, they siphon money from corporations and the rich, and then distribute it to charities. Mm-hmm. And so that was kind of the nature of the attack, not on the actual processes of the pipeline itself, mm-hmm. but on the money that was coming in, and so that could affect it down the road as far as supply goes. If you lose half of all your income, then your supply chain will be affected. Up. Yeah,
and so they shut down the pipeline. It was shut down, I think, for a total of 6 days, which caused in some places like Washington D.C., North Carolina, I think the overwhelming majority of gas stations at various points just completely ran out of gas. And while I don't think the owners of the Colonial Pipeline have confirmed this, there's been some reports that they paid, something to the tune of $5 million in cryptocurrency to whoever did this in order to get the key to unlock the malware. And so I've seen a lot of concern. I mean, I got one Facebook friend I know that commented something about this, about, in the olden days they used pencil and paper to make things happen. Why doesn't that happen now? And part of the answer to that may be, well, because you can't run pipelines that way. Right. You're shipping things differently back then. And there weren't as many people. The population wasn't as high and all that. But when you and Dr. Monk says, I did write a comment about that. I did read Vice articles today. I was totally shocked what crazy stuff they write about. I think those authors need mental help. I'm not. Are you familiar with
Vice? I'm familiar, but I don't frequently read them, so I'm not sure which article.
Dr. Monk, if you watch the show enough, one thing you'll learn about me is I'm not a fan of the media, and so I'm not as familiar with that particular, but. I got to tell you, it doesn't surprise me. I used to be more of a fan of the media, but it's hard to get objectivity out of anything anymore.
And good reporting, good journalism. Reporting,
and a lot of that is because of the way let's face it, it's because of the internet. Because it used to be, back in the olden days when us almost 50-year-olds were growing up, there were 3 places to get your news, all right? ABC, NBC, CBS, they had a nightly news program at 6 o'clock every night. That's where you got your news. You wanted more than that, you bought a print newspaper that got delivered to your door every morning. Nowadays, with all the internet outlets, it's like you can get news anywhere. And the way they make money is by having ads appear, for example, on their website. Well, in order to get you to see those ads, when they make money off their ads, what do they need you to do? They need you to click on their stories. Yep. And hence the term clickbait, And so now we've gotten into a clickbait mentality where sensationalism sells. Mm-hmm. Getting people angry gets them to click on things. And so that's kind of what the slow descent we've seen in the media over the years is this clickbait, sensationalism, us versus them mentality, because that's what's keeping them afloat in an increasingly competitive environment. Tim Foster says, it's obvious that our society is being censored by all the news outlets, social media sites, and sadly most people, even Christians, are not aware of what is really going on in the world. That kind of gets back to what I was just saying, Tim, and I think that's why I think, and I'm not an expert, and somebody will tell me I'm completely wrong on this, but that's at least my anecdotal evidence, is that I think that the media is increasingly going to one side or the other. They're, trying to pit people against each other because they need you to click on their story. They need you to choose their media news story over someone else's. And unfortunately, and this gets back to what you're talking about, Tim, I think about people in general, is people aren't clicking on stories because they're true. They're clicking on stories because they're generating some kind of an emotional response in them. They're not clicking on stories that are just presenting objective facts. They're clicking on stories that, well, let's face it, generally agree with what they want to believe, and so they want to reinforce that belief system in there. So
there's also been interesting studies on people who actually read the articles fully versus just reading the headline and a couple lines of it.
Right.
So
right.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Most people don't even bother to read the whole article.
I had an 8th grade teacher that did an experiment on that, and I fell for it. And the whole class was laughing at me, and I was wondering why. One of those things where she tells, read the entire instructions before you begin the quiz. And of course, and read the whole quiz. You're supposed to read the whole quiz before you did a single question on it. And of course, the first 10 questions were incredibly difficult forever. And at the top it says the blank for your name and the date, and then all the questions begin. The very last question just said only fill out your name and date. And so just follow the instructions, read the whole thing. But anyway, Dr. Monk here says they write about getting sterilized and not getting babies in a healthy relationship. Looks like you see your partner only 2 days a month, and between those 2 days you meet many other people. Okay, I'm not familiar with that story.
Maybe that's the Vice article he's talking about.
I'm sure it's the Vice article that he's talking about. It's interesting, Dr. Monk, and we're not going to get to it tonight, and I don't know if we're going to get to all the stories we planned for tonight because we're running behind here. But one of the stories that was up for discussion tonight had to do with the how would you describe it? It was about the decreasing birth rates and the...
it was talking about why... the headline was why having babies in 2021 is controversial, and it had to do with, the decrease and, no longer we have an average birth rate of 2.6. Now it's down to like 1.6, and the different reasons for that and why people are waiting longer to have children. Interesting, but we didn't get to that one. Didn't get included on our show.
All right. Well, we do have a comment from the user profilers. Women's rights was a mistake. Repeal the 19th. And I'm assuming you're referring to the 19th Amendment. And, well, I'm not going to agree with you on that one.
Neither am I.
Yeah. All right. So we were talking about the pipeline and the outage and the cyber attack. What was your takeaway from hearing about that?
I guess, and I'll go back to the Christian perspective, and I just want to, because what we saw was, and there's memes floating around with it, but with every joke, there's a little bit of truth. So some of the memes were saying, in 2020, everyone was buying up toilet paper. Now in 2021, they're all buying up gasoline. So it's interesting to see. But I think that kind of hints at kind of the attitude whenever we're faced with a fear of scarcity. I think Christians, we know from a biblical perspective that God has not given us a spirit of fear. So as Christians, should we respond in panic buying? Because that's actually, in some of these articles, hint at actually what drove a lot of the shortage had more to do with the panic buying than, because even the CEO of Colonial Pipeline, or I don't know if it was some representative of Colonial Pipeline, stated that it wasn't so much a shortage as a supply crunch, meaning that they had intentionally halted the supply for a while so that they could take care of this malware or ransomware problem, but that the regular flow would continue shortly. But the outages, because it was decreased for a time, there's this panic. And I think I understand the sentiment that, we've seen so much in the past year that there's an attitude of, what can I get? How can I, take care of me and my family first? And I don't know. I guess my question, that I'm trying to phrase around this is: should Christians operate under the
scarcity model? No.
Right. That attitude. Yeah. So that's, I guess, where my thinking goes.
God will provide.
Yeah.
And it's
trust in the Lord always.
Yeah. Did you see the video of the lady putting just had plastic grocery bags that she was putting
They had to release a statement saying, "Please do not put gasoline in grocery bags."
I know. I was like, oh my gosh.
Oh, well, and that's another slew of memes. There's somebody, how about a tote? How about a laundry hamper, laundry basket? So all these different things. But yeah, so that beyond just the fear of scarcity, that leads to some dangerous things too. Mm-hmm. People were doing some dangerous things, and people, when they operate out of fear, that leads to more danger. Right. They don't think through their decisions as much, tend not to.
Dr. Monk here says, Green Deal logic on, and it's : you do not understand the facts, only drive electric cars, and you don't need gasoline. There's endless electric power coming out of the wall plugs. This saves the world. Look, and I'll say, I don't think we should ever be so blindly allegiant to anything except God. And that's not even blind. I'm going to get a whole apologetic thing.
Dependent
here,
on.
Dependent on. It says, and we close our eyes in front of people in South America dying before 30 because they're mining lithium for the batteries. And so I think we always need to be open to hearing, and being open to other suggestions. That's how progress is made. And if the day comes when, electricity is really at the point where it can replace fossil fuels and it can be more efficient and more cost effective, great. I'm not opposed to that per se. I just think that we need to be responsible and look at big picture. Number one, is it really meeting all the needs that you have is one of the number one questions. What are the secondary effects? There are a lot of people that, if the fossil fuel industry all went out overnight, they'd lose their jobs. And then what's the economic impact of that going to be?
Sure.
And so there's people who talk about the environmental concerns, and look, Christians are supposed to be good stewards of God's creation. I am all for that. Mm-hmm. But there's also other considerations. And and that's just a political thing in general. I think politics in general makes us look at everything from the perspective of only one issue and one issue only, and just kind of say, but don't look at this other stuff over here. We're going to keep this stuff hidden behind. Just look at this. Just look at this. Well, wait a minute. This is also relevant to the discussion. And I think the fuel industry debates are one of those areas.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that.
All right. So let's move on to story number 3 before my wife yells at us for going on too long. The show is supposed to be limited to about an hour and a half.
Oh, yeah. Well, let's see how much...
out of the frying pan into the fire?
Yeah, exactly. So this comes out of, at least the article that we're pulling from tonight is from Baptist News Global. And headline here says, largest church in Southern Baptist Convention ordains 3 women as pastors. The church in question here is Saddleback Church, famously pastored by Pastor Rick Warren. He's the author of Purpose-Driven Life, Purpose-Driven. He had a couple.
Purpose-Driven everything.
Yeah, Purpose-Driven.
Everything's driven by purpose.
Fill in the blank. So very popular Christian personality. And they're based... They're in the Southern Baptist Convention, so typically the Southern Baptist stance on ordaining female pastors has been no, that women cannot be ordained. And this is kind of a hot topic, especially in the Southern Baptist Convention and in Christendom in general. But so Saddleback Church had ordained on Mother's Day, or actually I think it was they released the photo on Mother's Day. They had ordained these pastors
shortly before that.
Before that, and they were campus pastors. But these women were already in ministry. They were in children's ministry, other areas of ministry, and then had just been recognized as pastors right around Mother's Day. So there's been a lot of comments back and forth, of course, stirring up the whole debate. Again, this debate is nothing new in Christianity, and it really amounts to interpretation of Scripture. But we can get into that in just a minute. But to give you the story first, that's the nuts and bolts of it, that it's caused a division again, or a line that people are arguing whether or not it should have happened.
So let me start out with the full disclosure statement. All right, so people know who you're listening to, especially Dr. Monk. If you're listening to us, you're not familiar with us. A lot of people here in the United States, here at Lutheran, we're Trinity Lutheran Church. They think ELCA. We are not ELCA. All right, we are belonging to a denomination. We belong to a denomination called the North American Lutheran Church, which, as a very astute observer once said, if you were to try to describe the North American Lutheran Church, if the ELCA and the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod had a love child, that would be the North American Lutheran Church. So in the North American Lutheran Church, while it does not recognize things such as homosexual marriage, things like that, or clergy are not recognized by the NALC, women clergy are. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I just kind of want to get that out on the table so people know, because look, we all come at things from a certain approach. Are there biases? Dr. Monk says, are you interested to hear a controversial story about how the Christian church in Germany is acting lately? I would, how do I put this nicely? Yes. I'd be shocked if you surprised me, though, but you can give it a shot. I'm kind of familiar with the Christian church in Germany, actually.
We could give him your email address, and he could email you the link.
Yeah, I guess it depends on how long the story is.
Yeah, I know.
So, you know what? If it's more than like a realistically, you can't sum it up quickly. Tell you what, here's what we can do, because I can post links. I'm going to regret this later on, but not for you, Dr. Monk, but because it's going to be out there. Maybe I'll delete this after the show is over. But there you go. In the comment section is now my email address. So if you want, if it's a long story, put it in an email, shoot it to me, and then we can take it up at the on next week's show. Sure. So, but if it's short enough, concise enough, you want to put in the comments, that's fine. But please, really, I mean, because we're already running late.
Sure.
So the. So I always like to admit, any potential biases, put the cards on the table so people know where we're coming from, and ask the denomination we're from. Personally, I am okay with female clergy, and I don't know if we need to. It's up. I mean, if we want to go there, we can go there. As far as the whole.
I don't know if we have time to go there.
I don't know if we have time to go there. But here's where the story.
Yeah, I'm Catholic. I'm a woman, but priests are men.
Yeah. So we have. Tim Foster says, Luke 18:8, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth? And he says no, for the most part. Well, it's an interesting question now, isn't it? And we're seeing, and we've talked about cultural shifts and where they're going. And somebody asked me earlier today whether something, I'm not going to go into specifics here, whether something that we had observed happening was a sign of Christian persecution. And my response, well, it wasn't coming from the government, so it wasn't like persecution in the sense of governmental persecution, but if you ask if it was cultural persecution, meaning, that's just a term that I just made up, so sure. But just basically meaning that because we're seeing shifts in culture that certain religious viewpoints are now no longer tolerated, then yes, it was.
Yeah, we're seeing that increasingly too.
Yeah. So, but getting into the Southern Baptist Church and the Saddleback issue, there are different ways of looking at this. First of all, my understanding of the Southern Baptist Convention, and somebody who is a member of it, which obviously we are not, can correct me if I am wrong, it wouldn't be fair to describe the Southern Baptist Convention as a denomination per se. They don't exert a lot of direct oversight and control over their members, is my understanding. Now, they do have some joint beliefs that I guess they're supposed to all share, right, or have some commonality in there, but it's more of a loose organization than what you might think of as a Christian denomination per se.
Well, and there are some other offshoots as well,
right,
such as there's like the association. Let me see if I can find them in here, but
yeah, so it's but that being said, I do think that I'm not opposed to the denominations. We belong to one, as long as we don't get in the way of recognizing the unity of the body of Christ as a whole. St. Augustine has a very famous quote: "In essentials, unity; in non-essentials, liberty; and in all things, charity." And that is the mentality we need to keep in mind. And I think denominations can serve a very important function in that, look, there's going to be differences of opinion. We're all fallen humans. We're not God. We're not going to understand everything perfectly. Only He does. And so we're going to have differences of opinion. And as long as we're all charitable about those, and we're trying to go walk down a path that we're really trying to learn God's word and God's will accurately, then I don't see any problem with having groups within Christianity of folks that believe the same way we do and gathering together to worship that way, because that's how, if we believe worship is done in a certain way, as long as we're not condemning people who do it differently, there's nothing wrong with gathering with groups of like-minded believers in that regard. I don't have a problem with that. Also, denominations can help with, pastoral calls and things like that. There's a lot of practical aspects to it as well. So to the extent that the Southern Baptist Convention, if they do have a set of beliefs that says, this is what it means to belong to the Southern Baptist Convention, and someone doesn't believe that, then yeah, just like if the NALC has a set of beliefs that this is what the NALC stands for, if you don't stand for that, then go someplace that does believe what you believe. You don't need to be part of this particular group. But my understanding from some of these comments is I don't know if the Southern Baptist Convention has that kind of strictness, because they say they have expelled some churches for their stance on same-sex marriage and things like that. But the Southern Baptist Convention, as a national entity, has never apparently expelled a church for ordaining women, whereas some local organizations have, but the national body has not. So I wonder if they actually have those kind of strict guidelines or not.
They do have a canon that they appeal to. I think it's mentioned in here. So there's if nothing else, it's a loosely conglomerated canon of tradition and things like that. Things that where they fall in line on particular issues of, and this is one of those things that we would call in theology, it's adiaphora. It's one of those peripheral things. It's not.
Here comes the Greek.
Well, it's not specific to. It just means that it's not. It's peripheral.
I knew you were going to pull the Greek. What did I say
it's
to you
not
before I came in
salvific.
here? I
So
said-
this is an issue of.
He's not even listening to me.
Yeah, it just means that it's peripheral. It's not an issue of salvation. It's not salvific. And so I love that quote that you brought up. It was in essentials, unity.
In non-essentials, liberty. In all things, charity.
And exactly, I think that sums it up beautifully, that this would be in that non-essentials category, although there is an element of practical, there's a practical element to this because it deals with ecclesiology, how you view the church, and how the church should function. And so it gets into a practical matter, of course, very practical, should women be ordained or not? And that comes down to interpretation of Scripture, and again, we don't have time to go into all of that, and there's a long history of debate, but suffice it to say that...
Sorry, finish your thought. There's conversation about what you're saying going on.
Sure. Suffice it to say that, I think that charity or kindness, Christian love is one of those things that is an essential, that is not negotiable. And so when we encounter differences of opinion, just like if we do in the world, we need to have grace and understanding and be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry, and be charitable.
So, Tim Foster has, first of all, he said 2 Timothy 2:23, have nothing to do with foolish, ignorant controversies. You know, they breed quarrels, absolutely. And then he also said, I think that is Latin, right, Ben? Is adiaphora?
Adiaphora is Latin. Ecclesiology is Greek. So you guys are both right.
You pulled them both out there. And then Dr.
Or it
Monk,
comes from Greek.
Dr. Monk here said, you know that Christians are having big trouble in the Middle East because of left politics. The church is siding on those values. You know there are many refugees from the Middle East. They're coming into Europe in general, but Germany in particular, yes, I know there have been a lot of Christian refugees from the Middle East that have been coming in there. As a matter of fact, we had an issue back when President Trump was still president about whether or not, there was some suggestion that he might have been contemplating making special rules for Christian refugees over other refugees to enter the United States, which, there was obviously debate about that. And then he also says here, Christian nuns which support Christians in the Middle East countries when they have problems came to Germany and warned from the ideology most of these people have. What did happen? The nuns got sent back. Let me read that again. Christian nuns which support Christians in the Middle East when people came to Germany and warned from the ideology most people have. I guess if I'm understanding, you're saying the nuns were from the Middle East and got sent back to the Middle East, or maybe I'm just that last comment about getting sent back. I didn't quite get. But yeah, I mean, there was an article. Shoot, was it one we were to talk about this week or one I just read? Or maybe we're still going to talk about it. I've lost track of what we're going to talk about the growth rates of the Christian church. We talked about this last week, didn't we?
Yeah.
And I can't remember where Germany fell on it, but I think Germany was one of the ones where Christianity was declining.
Yes. Yep.
Quite rapidly, wasn't it? It was one of the top 10 most.
A lot of the European countries are.
Right. And so it doesn't surprise me at all because there was a study we were talking about. I don't remember if we specifically mentioned Germany in it, but it's a story we talked about last week, which is talking about the countries in the world where Christianity is seeing the most rapid growth and the countries where they're seeing the most rapid decline. And the point the article was trying to make is that those countries where we see the most growth are ironically the countries where Christianity is being persecuted or at least not being approved by the government, whereas those countries where there's been historically some kind of approval of Christianity, that Christianity has actually been seeing decline. And Germany was one of those countries that was cited as being one of the top 10 most declining countries there. So... There's another YouTube comment. I'm not seeing another YouTube comment. Maybe it'll pop up on my feed here in a second. My wife's telling me there's another YouTube comment. If there is, give me a second, see if it pops up, and then we'll see. Because sometimes I'm noticing mine are a little delayed from when you're telling me, so that could just be the fact my internet connection.
One thing just to go back to the story.
Do you want me to read it to you?
Okay.
Go ahead.
It says, it's from Dr. Monk. The refugees are not Christian, but the nuns were from the Middle East.
Okay. And that's they got sent back
And
to
they
the
got
Middle
sent
East.
back because of hate speech.
Oh.
Going back to an earlier story. Yeah.
Yep.
And and somebody once told me, Dr. Monk, that we want to see the direction that America is headed, look to Europe. That Europe almost seems to be a few steps ahead or behind, depending on how you look at it, I guess, of where America is. And so,
Socially speaking.
yeah, well, and just even in their treatment of religion, like you look at the United Kingdom, Christianity is a much smaller percentage of the population in the UK. And yet, you think about what formed one of the objections that formed the United States was to, the Church of England, and, wanted to have freedom to have our own church. And so, 300 years ago, 200 years ago, not even 300, 250 years ago, whatever, we had, the church was so powerful in England that there was this, and there still is the Church of England, but think of the power that it had. Whereas now, look at where Christianity stands in England, and it's a very different story. And I think that's true across Europe.
Yeah.
So in regard to the Southern Baptist Convention, I guess where I come down on this one is, if the Southern Baptist Convention has strict rules for membership, and this is one of them, then I would say, all right, then Saddleback, go somewhere else or go out on your own. I mean, you're big. They got 24,000 members. They could be a denomination of their own.
They have at least 18 campus pastors.
Yeah, and I don't feel right. And interest of full disclosure again, I come from a denomination that had a lot of, shall we say, infighting before I came here to the Lutheran Church, and I guess and what I've seen through history is, people who don't believe what denomination believes try to come in and change the denomination, as opposed to just form your own group of people who are like-minded. And
go ahead.
I personally kind of have a problem with that because I've seen what it results in, and what it results in is not Christian behavior amongst people. So if they don't believe in this, then I think they should go somewhere else and not just try to pretend that they're still part of something they don't agree to. Now, if it doesn't have that kind of a strict guideline, then that changes things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the flip side of that is that one of the criticisms of Christianity is that we have so many denominations,
right,
and it doesn't seem like we can agree on anything.
Well, but that gets back to that Augustine quote. We don't have to agree on a lot of these non-essentials. You know.
Without,
but
we should do so in love.
Right,
Yeah.
That's the point. Is that we Christians need to do better than that, and we need to be able to model disagreement in a way that is different than the way the world models disagreement. Tim Foster here says Christianity is practically dead in Europe and on life support in the U.S., and there's nothing we can do to fix this here in our flesh, in my opinion. Jesus will fix this by coming against the dead church like a thief, and he quotes Revelation 3. I mean, there's something we were looking at recently that talked about the number of people who in America who say they're Christian, versus you actually boil down what those beliefs are, and
it's a wide disparity between.
And so the question is, you say you're a Christian, but you don't hold any Christian beliefs. And there's almost a level of cultural Christianity out there, And then Dr. Monk here says in Germany, you have to pay tax to church when you are in the church. This is law. I dropped out of church because I don't want to support the church when they side on critical leftist ideology. I'm curious, Dr. Monk, is there a state church in Germany? And hey, we're Lutheran, and we love German churches. Is there a state church in Germany similar to the Church of England? Because I find that interesting that you have to pay a tax to the church. Is that actually just going to the church, or is that like a governmental imposed tax?
That'd be interesting.
But I agree that you shouldn't. Well, I do think God's word is very clear that we should be supporting the ministry of the church, and the workers worth their wages, and the pastoral should be supported, and all that. We should, you shouldn't be forced to support anything, first of all. There's no coercion in that. And you shouldn't be forced to support something, especially that doesn't line up with God's word.
Everyone should give, not under compulsion, but out of the love on their heart. God loves a cheerful giver.
Tim Foster says about 75% claim Christian, about 30% claim to be born again in the USA, is what he's saying. Yeah. Whatever study we looked at, Tim, it got even more specific than that. This was a while ago now. Because what it did is it talked about just kind of overall, are you a Christian or not? And then it went, okay, do you believe this? Do you believe this? Do you believe this? And when you started looking at the individual beliefs, it's like, well, then why do you say you're a Christian?
Doctrinal beliefs, like the inerrancy of Scripture, that Jesus never sinned. That was a big one.
That was a big one, yeah.
Yeah. And so when you break it down like that, then it turns out doctrinally, a lot of people aren't Christian, at least on the essentials.
Right. On the essentials, unity. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So, all right. Let's move on to our next story here. And this is this is one I found interesting, and we'll see if you have the same opinion on this one. But all right, so House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is a Catholic, and as here in the United States, my wife scoffed a little bit at that one. Sorry, here in the United States, there has been a push amongst many leaders in the Catholic Church that when you have not just anybody, mind you, but someone who's a politician who's in elected office and who is actively advocating or pushing for pro-choice causes or pro-abortion causes and laws, that they want to deny that person communion.
Or any moral evil.
Any moral evil, right. This issue is arising in the particular context of abortion, but any moral evil, they want to say, you know what? Well, I mean, because keep in mind, especially, and it's true of the Lutheran Church too, you're supposed to come to the table with the proper state of your heart, And so if the argument goes, if you're coming to the table with willing, intentional, unrepentant sin on your heart, then you're not in a position where you should be taking communion or the Eucharist in this case. So,
actually, biblically speaking, the person who does so eats and drinks judgment upon themselves, is what Paul would say.
So there was a press conference on last Thursday where a reporter asked Nancy Pelosi to react to the fact that the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, and this is the reporter's words, quote, doesn't want you to receive communion, end quote. Her initial response was, no, they don't. I think I can use my own judgment on that. We'll get to that statement in a little bit. I mean, that's, isn't that, there's a statement about our culture in general right there, isn't there? Mm-hmm. But then she went on to say she was pleased with what the Vatican put out on that subject and asked the reporter had read this statement that came out by the Vatican. And the reporter then basically said, well, yes, and gave the summary saying that the Vatican Statement was leaving the matter of whether to give communion to Catholic politicians to support abortion up to individual priests. And Pelosi said, no. No, it basically said don't be divisive on the subject. Kind of tagline put in there. So what the actual statement said, all right? It was put out by Louis Ladaria, who is the prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith of the Catholic Church, all right? He wrote out a letter, and he said a couple things. He said, first of all, establishing a national policy, all right, a universal policy on the matter would become a source of discord rather than unity within the episcopate and the larger church in the United States, which is presumably the part that Nancy Pelosi was referring to. He then goes on to say, however, that local ordinaries, the local Catholic officials, should engage in dialogue with politicians within their jurisdiction who adopt a pro-choice position regarding abortion, abortion legislation, euthanasia, or other moral evils as a means of understanding the nature of their positions and their comprehension of Catholic teaching. All right. He did encourage the bishops to avoid giving the impression that abortion and euthanasia alone are the only grave matters of Catholic moral and social teaching that demand the fullest accountability on the part of Catholics. Earlier in the month, the Archbishop Salvatore Cordeleone, who oversees the Archdiocese of San Francisco, put out a very firmly worded statement where he basically said that, look, this is to say you're Catholic while saying about denying the fundamental teachings of Catholicism, in his words, is simply dishonest. He did not agree with that. So I guess here's a couple questions to ask about this one. One is, what do we think about, taking communion in the state of your heart, and is this implicated here? And the other one, I guess, would be, is Nancy Pelosi accurately describing the letter that was released by the Vatican?
No, I don't think she is. Short answer. Yeah, this comes down to, and actually it's interesting, at least the way I'm interpreting what the letter from the Vatican said, is it comes down to an issue of pastoral authority, spiritual authority. So it kind of ties even into the Southern Baptist, the story we just did about ordination of women pastors, because the issue there is not men versus women. It's necessarily, biblically speaking, it's an issue of authority that God has created certain roles for people to be in. But here, priests in the Catholic Church exercise authority. They're shepherds over their flock, and so the Vatican was basically releasing authority from the top down to those ordinaries to be able to make their own judgment call. So Pelosi's the way she's painting it is not accurate because she clearly only read what she wanted to read into it. But the question about what do we believe about communion? So again, cards on the table, full disclosure. Yeah. What we practice here in the Lutheran Church is called open communion. And so we say, and especially we like to do this even when we know we've got a lot of visitors with us, or we'll say it a lot of times at weddings or funerals where the Eucharist is being celebrated, we'll say that we practice open communion. And we explain that what that means is that if you believe, like we do, that along with the body and blood, along with the bread and wine, you receive the body and blood of Jesus Christ, that you are partaking in Christ, and so you're receiving the gifts of forgiveness of sins. And so that's really the only qualifier. However, biblically speaking, we should add a qualifier there that there is a certain way. When we teach First Holy Communion classes, there's a certain way that we approach the Eucharist. Is that, first of all, Eucharist means thanksgiving. It's a meal of giving thanks. Giving thanks for what? Thanks for our salvation. And, then our salvation is bringing us into a right relationship with God. When we get into a right relationship, part of that is turning away from our sin. Part of receiving forgiveness is recognizing you need forgiven of something. And Martin Luther, to quote Martin Luther, the very first of his 99 Theses was when our Lord and Savior said, repent, he intended the entire life of the believer should be one of repentance. Meaning that every day we all sin in things done or undone. That's a phrase that we like to use, things that we know about or even don't know about, that offends God. It offends either his spoken word or his will for our lives. And so every day we have things that we should be confessing and repenting of and seeking holiness. That's the whole process of being sanctified, being like Christ. So when we approach communion, we adopt that attitude of humility. And that's, I guess, where it comes down to is it's an attitude of humility of the heart, humbling ourselves because we don't take anything from God. We can't take communion. We receive it. It's a free gift, but the act of receiving is a humbling act. And so to come to the table with the sin of pride and arrogance, saying I can make my own judgment call on this and I don't have to, 1 John 1:8, if we claim to be without sin, we deceive ourselves,
yep. And
the truth is not in us.
Amen.
So if we're claiming to be without sin, we're saying I don't need to repent daily, well, then you're not agreeing with God and what he says about it. And so, that's my 2 cents on it.
Yeah, and there's a couple comments I want to get caught up on here. Dr. Monk answered my question earlier about the taxing, and he said the Catholic Church and Lutheran Church, and when you work, you have to pay a certain percentage from your earnings unless you drop out of the church. So if you're a member, I guess, of the Catholic Church or the Lutheran Church, you get there's a tax that comes out that goes to support the churches. The government takes it away before you get your pay.
So every citizen is a de facto member of the church?
No, I think if I'm understanding this correctly, Dr. Monk, if you are a member of the church, then you. They were supposedly there now.
I'm seeing me looking at my phone. I think we're back.
Yeah, okay.
And I'm the only one here. All right, thank you.
Walk in front of the camera. I apologize. Here we go. All right.
Thanks for bearing with us. Looks like we're back. We had some technical
Sorry,
issues.
We had a little bit of a bad Ethernet cable there, it looks like. So we had to swap that out real quick. And now I might have problems because I got to turn my Wi-Fi on. I took the Ethernet cable from the computer that I use to follow the comments and plugged that into the stream.
Those are at least our YouTube comments.
Those are YouTube comments. Well, I should be able to hopefully get it here. We'll see. I might just be a little bit behind. All right. So, yeah, there was I was reading some of the YouTube comments that had come up here.
We were talking.
Yeah, so it looks
I think
like
the last thing we were talking about was
Dr. Monk had mentioned.
Yeah, the government sponsorship.
Oh, right, and so
Yeah.
it does sound like we were talking last week about how. Oh, I got to turn my volume down. There we go. How we were talking last week about the fact that in states where there's government sponsorship of religion, that it actually Christianity seems to be in a decline. Not even sponsorship as much as support, and I would say that that's probably what that support is, what it's shaping up to be.
Referencing, yeah.
In Germany. Let me see if I can catch up on some of these here. Then Tim Foster says, I wonder how many people at Trinity know or don't know what God's word states concerning the practice of abortion. I've never heard it mentioned, just saying. Well, in fairness to him, I will say that it has been. It's not, I don't think we've had a sermon exclusively dedicated to that, but I know I've heard Pastor Jay has preached on it, at least touched on it in some of his messages. Ben, you gave a message last year sometime.
Yeah.
Or probably the first 10 minutes or so of your message.
Yeah.
Or so maybe not quite that long, but
There was a portion of it.
Yeah. And we, obviously on this show we've talked about it and we've done in different studies and it's come up. And yes, obviously, we're pro-life.
Yeah.
We've been very, very upfront about that. But as far as what other people here in the congregation believe or know, I don't know. I couldn't say that. And then Dr. Monk here says, what are the sins you were talking about? Do you mean the 7 sins? I'm not sure what that was in connection with, because we got all this hubbub about the internet connection being lost. But
I'm assuming it's sins when you come to receive communion, that we all sin
I
in
think-
different ways,
yeah,
sins
I think that's
known and
where-
unknown.
Yeah.
Not necessarily. In the Lutheran Church, those 7 deadly sins. We don't make the distinction in the Lutheran Church between venial and mortal sins, but we do. All sins separate us from God, and so we all sin in ways. Part of our tradition, we say we have sinned against you in ways, things that we've done and things we've left undone. So there are sins of commission, things that we do, and sins of omission, things that we fail to do. So really any sin, anything that we either purposely do that draws us out of that relationship with God or detracts from our relationship with God, or things that we fail to do, things that we know God wants us to do and we fail to do it. So the argument here is the politicians who are actively and actually I think the letter to the Vatican Church mentions the word obstinate. They are obstinately in opposition to the Catholic Church's teaching as well as the biblical teaching on abortion, and so that constitutes a sin of
commission.
Yeah, you know what the stance of God is, and basically you're saying, I know what you say, God, but I'm going to do it my way. I can make my own judgment on that.
Well, yeah, and that's what I found interesting about the story when I first read it is, and I get to this, I come from an upbringing that the pastor in the Catholic Church, the priest, there is an authority there that you need to respect. Now, that's not to say there aren't, ways that people, that fallen human beings who are holding those positions can, lose their right to that authority over you. There absolutely are. I'm not going to go into personal details, but I have a former pastor that exemplified losing that authority. But at least as a general rule, there's got to be some kind of authority structure. And, if a pastor isn't committing some major sin, among other things, that's supposed to be kind of the final word, and we're supposed to follow their leadership. A pastor, a priest, whatever, can't lead a congregation. The congregation isn't willing to be led. All right. And so when I hear statements like Nancy Pelosi's, where you've got these church leaders telling her, I don't think your heart's in the place it needs to be to take communion, and then her response is, well, I'll be the judge of that. Yes, if I want to be as charitable as possible, I would say it's true. No one can know what's in her heart other than her. Truly, know completely what's in her heart other than her. but your actions do speak for what's in your heart. And based on what you're doing in your actions, these church authorities who are supposed to be have some level of authority over you, if you are a member of that church body, are telling you that your actions seem to indicate that your heart's not where it needs to be. Yeah. And rather than listen to that and reflect upon that, it's just, I'll be the judge of that.
Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. So you'll know a tree by the fruit that it bears. So you don't necessarily need to know exactly what's in a person's heart if you see the fruit that stems from that.
Fruits of the Spirit. Sorry, and poor Dr. Monk has no idea what I'm doing. We had a kids show on this program. It actually just finished its run called Fruits of the Spirit, and I was starting to sing the theme song. Cute little number, but I'm not going to do that. That's my concern more than anything, is just the lack of, well, two things. I guess number one, the lack of respect for authority within the church, which kind of think parallels our lack of respect for authority in our culture. Period. But also the picking and choosing. How many times are we going to see this? It's like, no, I don't. The way the reporter characterized it, I think, was completely fair. Yeah. The way he characterized this letter that the Vatican put out, just leaving it up to individual priests. And so there was a lot of stuff in there I'd agree with. Yeah, everybody, you shouldn't necessarily always act like every situation is the same, because it's not. You shouldn't act like this one sin is the only sin. It's not. But when he characterized that, it just says don't be divisive on it. And that's a political tagline. It's a talking point that now she's trying to put in the words of the Vatican by picking one little part of that letter and conveniently ignoring the part where it goes on to say that this is sinful. This is not compatible with Catholic teaching, right, and encouraging church leaders to talk to these politicians about that. Well, we don't want to talk about that part. We just want to talk about this one part. And that's not just a lesson for politics, although we know how I feel about politics. It's a lesson for life. It's something that we humans need to do all the time, and we Christians need to step up and do better. It's picking and choosing what we want to be true and want to listen to, and ignoring that part that challenges us. Right. We need to take things in the whole picture. Dr. Monk here says what I think is interesting. What Pelosi is doing, it does not only oppose Christian values, it also opposes satanic values. I'm not sure I follow you on that one.
The only satanic value I'm aware of is do as thou wilt, which in that regard she sort of is.
Oh, we're so going to get banned from YouTube over this. I'm not calling Nancy Pelosi a Satan worshiper. We're not doing that. Nobody take this and say that. But anyway, I'm interested, Dr. Monk, what exactly you're meaning by that. Because it's an interesting question. All right, so let's move on to our final story of the day, because it is 7 o'clock, when we normally are signing off by, but we're not.
All right, in 30 seconds or less. Just kidding. All right.
But no, I do appreciate it. I joke about the time, but this has been a great show. I've loved the interaction. Yeah, Keep it coming. This has been fantastic. I want to encourage that. So
yeah, thank you, everybody who's been sending in comments. It's great. So our final story for tonight is comes from the Christian Post, but it's another kind of political one. So the headline here: Biden cancels Trump's plans for National Garden of American Heroes. So you may remember, those of you, at least especially if you follow American politics, President Trump last year, right before the 4th of July, actually it was on July 3rd, he signed an executive order 13934, which called for building and rebuilding monuments for American heroes. This bill was going to put into effect a national garden of American heroes. It would be a place to honor and depict historically significant Americans who have contributed positively to America throughout our history. Now, the initial list of those was sort of small. It started out with our founding fathers, as well as other civil rights leaders such as Frederick Douglass, Martin Luther King Jr., Harriet Tubman, and Billy Graham was on there. But then that eventually grew to where they were including other people like singers. I think Elvis Presley was in there. Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Ruth Bader Ginsburg wasn't a singer, but she was the Supreme Court justice.
You don't know that.
Well, okay.
She could have had a beautiful singing voice.
Not a celebrity singer. But
Sarah Palin
that's
was on
true.
The Masked Singer, yes. That's true.
Yeah, Johnny Cash, Aretha Franklin, Bob Hope, Whitney Houston. So a whole slew of people, American heroes. So the category kind of broadened. But the goal, I think, behind this was, Trump had cited in here that the U.S. is facing a dangerous anti-American extremism that seeks to dismantle our country's history, institutions, and very identity. So I guess the goal behind this American Garden of Heroes was to kind of inject some patriotism in support of our country. Well, now, anyway, all that aside, President Biden has just effectively undone that. And this isn't the only executive order that he has reversed. Some other ones that this article makes mention of is, let's see, specifically, let me see if I can find it here. Additional Trump-era actions targeted for reversal by Biden include an executive order rebranding the U.S. Foreign assistance to advance American influence and an executive order protecting Americans from over-criminalization through regulatory reform. So that's a number of different things, and basically it's the current administration sniping at the previous administration, which is nothing new in politics. I think we see that occasionally. But to this extent, maybe it's a different story. What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, in fairness, that's his right as president. I mean, it's kind of like when a new CEO takes over a company, you expect that they're going to, there's a reason they clean house. They've got their way they want to do things. The new CEO of Disney, Bob Chapek, I don't think is doing things right, but that's a different matter of discussion altogether. But that's, so he's the president. So an executive order is exactly that. It's an order of the executive. If the executive who made it is no longer executive, and he now is, he has that right. He can do that. Now, okay, Dr. Monk here says, in answer to my earlier question about the satanic values, he says, responsibility to the responsible instead of concern for psychic vampires. Do not harm little children. Do not kill non-human animals unless you are attacked or for your food. Those are some satanic values regarding to the Church of Satan, and I think Pelosi, et cetera, opposed those. Okay, so you're talking about the formal, there's a organization, the Church of Satan, that has certain values that it puts out there, and you're saying that these are values that they hold to, that ironically her viewpoint, you think, even goes against them. And I will tell you that the Church of Satan, as it's known, I'm not going to say universally all members, a lot of those members actually try to say that we're not actually worshiping an entity, an actual being, Satan. Right. Frankly, a lot of them are atheists, that are in that. I think there's a variety within it. I've never been to one of their meetings, so I'm not going to just say for sure, and never going to either.
They are worshiping a being. It's the being of self.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, the irony is not lost there. Tim Foster says, do you think this applies? Exodus 20, verse 4, you shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above or that is in the earth beneath or that is in the water under the earth. Yes, you can elaborate. It's the idolatry.
Which story is he talking to?
I think he's talking
to this one, the national hero.
I'm sorry. Maybe you're. I'm still going back to the Pelosi thing about where our discussion about how we elevate ourselves. Like you said, worshiping the self. Can you set yourself up as an idol? You're right, Mary Kay. Tim's probably asking about the statues in the garden. Is that idolatry? I would say no, because the point is
it idolatry? Is it artwork? What is it?
Are you worshiping this thing? I mean, if you think about, let's take the golden calf for the example. Okay, when the Israelites built the golden calf, what did they do? They were dancing. They were worshiping it as if this was representative. Now, they were worshiping as if it was representative of their God, mind you, but that made it all the worse, really. And so,
although the only God that would have been represented as a calf was Baal.
Right. So I think that if it doesn't, there's nothing wrong with statues per se. I don't think that amounts to amount of idolatry. The question is what you do with it and how you view it. So now here's where it could become idolatry. Where do you put your faith?
Yeah.
If you put your faith in government and not in God, and then you start building all these statues to government leaders as expressions of where your faith really lies, then for you it could become idolatry, I would say.
Yeah, I would tag on to that. The prohibition against any carved image
And I'm sorry, Tim says maybe not. The next verse, do not bow down to them.
Right.
But bow down is a posture of worship. And that's where I think we're getting at. But go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. It comes down to the question of form versus function. So you can make things in a certain form in the shape of whatever, and what is their function? What's their purpose? And that's two distinctions that you want to make. In the case of the golden calf, the form was a calf, but they were worshiping it as an idol. But even in the Old Testament itself, God instructed the Israelites to create on the Ark of the Covenant a mercy seat with 2 cherubim. So they made a form of 2 cherubim. Those were small statues, small sculptures of cherubim facing the mercy seat. But in that case was not considered idolatry, actually was instructed by God. And so it really, the issue of function, what is the function that it's serving? And so, yeah, I think it comes down to a worship. Are you worshiping it? Which, in this case, it may still apply if the person, and that comes down to an individual basis, if this garden of heroes is, if you worship these American heroes, and we can do that. We set up for ourselves idols of even today. Even I've never have really liked the name of the show American Idol.
Yeah.
Because I
don't like the show anymore either.
Well, yeah, but the name American Idol insinuates that here's this person who's going to win this show, and you should see them as an idol, as somebody to aspire to, somebody to worship, basically to model yourself after. Because if we're worshiping Christ. We're supposed to model ourselves after him. But so many people set themselves up any type of idol. And if you're modeling yourself after anybody other than Christ, that's an idol.
Yeah, I got to tell my American story, my American Idol story here. So I've got, hold on, I'm going to look this up real quick, but I don't get this wrong. Come here. So I've got some friends. Stop it, phone. What are you doing? Stop. All right. Yeah, I've got some friends who have been on the show before, and I think you've met them, Keith and Lori Trump. Keith is a pastor in, oh gosh, he's going to kill me. He's where did I just go for the national thing a couple years ago? I had dinner with them. Indianapolis.
Yeah.
Right.
I was going to say.
Yeah, so he's a pastor of Living Truth Church. Who is primarily based in Indianapolis, although they have some satellite locations, and his wife Lori. Lori was a friend of mine in high school, and they have a son whose name is also Keith, if I remember correctly. I think they call him Keithy, but I don't know if they do anymore because he's like grown up. And he is a singer, and he's got like some YouTube videos, things like that. This past season, he got to audition for American Idol, and he went on. I can't remember what he's saying. I saw the clip afterwards. But what was, this also gets back to an earlier conversation maybe, let's just say what was very telling about it was the way they edited it together, because he comes back afterwards and says they didn't choose him for the show, but they had some very constructive comments and things like that. But in the final cut, all that made it was people essentially making fun of his last name. So that's my American Idol story. I'm sorry. One of the things that, it's entertainment. It's not really geared towards talent.
Didn't we also find out that he didn't really get to choose? They told him what song to sing.
I think they told him what song to sing too. It wasn't the song he was going to sing or something. I remember correctly. Lori, if you happen to watch this sometime,
and it wasn't really made for his. It didn't really fit his voice, and it was funny because he said, Lori told us that was one of the pieces of constructive criticism, is that perhaps a different song would have been better.
Yeah.
But when he was made to sing that by the producers or whoever was sending him into the room, I find that, very disingenuous.
Yeah. And let's see, Tim Foster here says, Micah 1:7, all her, and he's put a USA question mark, carved images shall be beaten to pieces, all her wages shall be burned with fire, and all her idols I will lay waste. I would say that's more referring to true idols, and that gets back to the conversation we were talking about as far as the form versus function, I guess. And then Dr. Monk says, in my opinion, those ideologies which are followed by many leftist politicians are totally anti-human, anti-peace, anti-life. I think it is the worst form of evil, hiding behind empty, good-sounding words unless you do not look into them, and only doing stuff which destroys life, good, peaceful society, etc. I guess here's what I'd say to that, and I don't know if this qualifies as agree and disagree or what. I do think we need to be careful about addressing the issues, not people, obviously. Not that you can, maybe that even comes out wrong because, like we just talked about with Nancy Pelosi, and your actions do say something about you, and there's things that need to be addressed. But I do think lots of times people on both sides of the political aisle, and I guess I'm speaking from the U.S. here too. Obviously you're dealing with a different situation there in Germany, Dr. Monk, so I can't speak to that. But at least here in the U.S., I think by and large you got people on different sides of the political aisle that may agree, if you really boil down to it, on what the goal should be, at least generally, and then they have very wild disagreements about how best to get there to achieve that goal. And then we have a media system and everything in place and a political system that's designed to pit us against each other, and that's what all the hatred spews and everything like that. But we need to, make sure we're looking at all people as children of God in the sense that they were all creations of God. Not all are saved. I don't believe in universalism and all that. That being said, here's where I do agree with you, is that I think all of humans have this tendency to use, I like to call it rhetorical flourish, to avoid or to influence, and to the extent where we don't necessarily get behind that rhetorical flourish and see what's really being said. And it happens on both sides. Let's face it, we're talking about abortion here tonight. If I go on a website that is opposed to abortion, they'll describe themselves as pro-life. Why? Because life is a good thing. Who would ever be against life? Everybody wants life, right? Life's a good thing. We want to support that. Whereas if you go on a website that's opposed to abortion and they're describing that same position, what do they say? Anti-choice, because everybody loves, you want to be able to have free choice, and if you're opposed to people having free choice, then it's rhetoric. It's just rhetorical flourish that we put up there to avoid having these conversations about the actual issues and try to influence people through that.
Right.
So,
yeah, it's certain. And it goes back to even like the clickbait example that you said. There, certain words carry certain connotations, which elicit an emotional response, and that's the goal. Just like it's verbal clickbait, that you can use this rhetoric to get around addressing the issue at hand.
And Tim Foster here says public figures warrant public rebukes, and for their public statements, I would say yes. I mean, I think sometimes with your paparazzi and everything, we get a little bit too invested in that and too prying. I mean, they're humans; they deserve some level of privacy. We had an instance a while ago where people were being accosted when just trying to eat dinner at a restaurant and things like that. So there's a limit to that. But for their public statements and their public policies, yes, I would agree with that. And then he says, also Tim Foster, to the lowly sinner, parentheses, all of us, yes, Jesus said, where are your accusers now? Go and sin no more. And that's a great story, and we can debate about whether it was in the original or not, but it's the woman caught in adultery. So many good things, wonderful things about that story. But one of the things is it really does drive home how everybody's a sinner. But the mere fact that, Jesus doesn't just end there. He doesn't just say, oh, where are your accusers? Okay, take off. It was he still confronted the woman. Yeah. It still confronted her with her sin. She didn't escape that, that starting to go and sin no more. In regard to what I'm curious about, getting back to the National Garden of American Heroes, one thing that I'm curious about is I didn't see anything in this article or elsewhere that explained why. Why did he rescind it? Yeah. I mean, I have a guess. There's one particular name who had something to do with creating the March for Life that I think was on that list that might have had something to do with it. But that's admittedly, just a guess. There was nothing that said it explicitly. So it's possible there's some, my wife's saying we've been going for 100 minutes. She has signs she holds up for how long we've been going on, and she's actually run out of signs. She had to make a 100-minute sign to hold up to tell us we've been going on for too long. We'll wrap it up. This is the last story, honey. Yeah. So, I mean, there's no, and the tear, I know, we got the face of the tear going down it. There's no explanation about why he did it. Maybe, I mean, there could be a perfectly legitimate reason. Maybe there's budgetary issues. Maybe there's issues with, the location, or I don't know. But when you don't explain it, and maybe he has, and if someone's aware of the explanation that's put out there, put it in the comments, let me know. But to my knowledge, there's been no explanation. It was just, I'm rescinding this. You do certainly create the impression that you're rescinding it for kind of purely political reasons, which is unfortunate. Well, I get that nobody from that political side of the aisle is ever going to want to put up a statue of anyone who created the March for Life. I get that. by and large, the names that were to be included in this were from both sides of the political aisle. And the justification for it was almost to create a, shall we say, a proper sense of patriotism. I mean, keep in mind, God's supreme in our minds, always is. But this idea of, hey, there's almost an anti-nationalism sentiment that's growing. And I think that the mentality was, we can celebrate people who have come from various different political perspectives, but who have still had a profound impact. Look, I said before, I don't agree with a lot of what Ruth Bader Ginsburg did. I think I don't like the way, I think she did politicize herself too much. She kind of embraced her celebrity status a bit too much, and sometimes said things in the media that I don't think she should have said, because while it wasn't necessarily commenting on specific cases that were coming her way, they were on issues that could be coming in front of her, and I didn't think that was appropriate. That being said, you're just naive if you don't recognize the profound impact she had on this country, on this nation, and the accomplishment she had as a she wasn't the first female that got appointed to the Supreme Court. That falls to Sandra Day O'Connor. But she certainly is someone who had a profound impact on the direction of our country and our country as a whole. And so to the extent that the goal of this was to kind of say, almost to bring us together and say, hey, look, we can have people from both sides of the political aisle we want to recognize.
There were male, female, there was, in the list I saw, there was multiple ethnic backgrounds, political affiliations. They weren't all politicians.
Yeah. There were a lot of entertainers and other things.
There were people who did some really great things for our nation.
Billy Graham made the cut.
There were people who defined what our nation is.
There wasn't a faith thing. Remind me, who are the civil rights leaders they mentioned?
Martin Luther King, Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman.
You could say Thurgood Marshall in there.
Marshall.
Yeah. As an attorney who again became the Supreme Court.
It was just it was a very, I thought, diverse group.
Now, the only knock I'm going to have on Whitney Houston, who was included in the group, and this is going to make me really unpopular, I do not like her rendition of "I Will Always Love You." It's like nails on a chalkboard to me. Give me the Dolly Parton original. But I love Whitney Houston. I love all her other music. That song,
Do you know Whitney Houston's favorite type of coordination?
Oh my goodness.
Anyway.
All right. So Ryan Aronofsky just said I could listen to you guys all night. Great conversation tonight. I was going to use that as a lead in to say, see, Mary Kay, you need to make more higher numbers. But after Ben saying, I think he just changed Ryan's opinion. He says, I could listen to you guys all night until now.
The only other thing I'll say about this story is just to echo what you said about, when there's no, and I had that same thought while reading this article, was there was no reason given, and when there is no reason given, then people are left to fill in the blanks themselves. Right. So I question if it had to do with...
Yeah, that's always a dangerous thing.
It is always a dangerous thing. And I question two possibilities. The one that you had mentioned about the particular individual who started the March for Life, and also with the unrest over the past year that we saw of people tearing down statues of some of the people on this list.
Right.
Statues were torn down of, and so maybe that was bowing to some of that social pressure.
Yeah. Which it may be. We just don't know. And I just, interest of full disclosure, come on, let's just put and we're never going to be more unified in the correct sense of the term. I always say that because we had an episode, I don't know how long ago it was now, we talked about what true unity means from a Christian perspective, but we're never going to be more unified if we can't stop playing the games like that and just lay our cards on the table.
Yeah, can't we find something to agree on?
Yeah.
Something to celebrate. Something that isn't divisive.
Why can't we be friends? I gotta
stop singing!
I'm sorry.
That was way too loud in the mic, probably. I apologize to everybody out there if I blew out anybody's speakers. Dr. Monk says, nice talking today. I'll try to tune in the next time you're on. Thank you. Please do. It was a great conversation. Really loved everybody that was on tonight and the wonderful conversation we had. I am going to wrap things up, though, because I have to go home with that lady over there. And she's not going to be too happy with me
I'm tired.
if we don't wrap this up. And
What time is it now, Dr. Monk?
Yeah, dude, it's after midnight in Germany now, isn't it?
It's tomorrow.
Like, is it after 1 a.m.? Are you still watching us? Tim Foster says, "Thank you, guys. Thank you, Tim.
Thank
really,
you.
seriously."
Yeah.
But now I want to vamp for 20 seconds. I wanted the answer from Dr. Monk.
We talked him into tomorrow.
It is 1:22 a.m.
1:22 a.m. Dr. Monk, I really appreciate you watching the show, but go to
It is
bed,
an
man.
entirely different day.
Yeah, that's late.
Welcome
But
to
seriously, I
Thursday.
appreciate everybody here. So we do have to sign off because I actually have more work to do as well. So thank you all very much for watching here again. We are live on this channel every Wednesday at 5:30 Eastern time. He responded. It hasn't shown up on my page. Oh, there it is. 1:22. Oh, you are a trooper, man. That's amazing. I plan to be in bed by 1:22 tonight, my time. Although I might not be. We'll see. So, thank you, Mary Kay, for your fabulous producing duties here this evening. Thank you, Ben, for the stimulating conversation.
Thank you, Ken.
And thank
for
you,
everything.
everybody out there who participated. It's a great show. Join us again next week, 5:30. See you then. God bless.